everybody, Aaron Cowan, Sage Dynamics, and this is my review of the Mac 9 DS Comp 4.25. As you guys know, I like to take a look at pretty much every 2011 I can get my hands on, or double stack 1911. Mac, and as you guys know, I've done a review on a Mac DS9 before. This is a comp version of the 4.25. I like comp guns. Some people like to take the macho standpoint that you do not need a compensator for 9mm. I don't need 4-piston brakes, but I like them. There is an appreciable advantage to a compensator, and of course this is a review, it's not a video about pros and cons of comps, but it factors into it. If I can get less recoil, I'm going to take it. The caveat, of course, to that is the gun has to be reliable. So having a gun come from a factory with a compensator usually tends to insinuate that a lot of thorough testing has been done and the gun is going to be reliable without me having to change things. That's an important factor. Now Mac produces guns that are kind of, I wouldn't say rebranded, but sold in the United States primarily under the Mac name, coming from Turkey. This is also known as a Turcado because it is, at least on the face, similar to a Staccato. It's not, but it is. Very similar guns in respect to operating systems. This is a Series 70 gun, not a Series 80, so there is no firing pin block, and I know that's going to give some people some concern for drop safety. I understand that. However, the Series 70 is preferred by some people because it results in either a arguable or a literal lighter, crisper trigger pull because of the lack of that extra mechanism inside the gun, which creates friction and drag on the pull of the trigger. So it's understandable how there might be people in both camps depending on what you're going to use the gun for. Now what you're getting is a double stack 1911 style gun, 4.25 inch barrel, but there's an asterisk on that because of the way that they machined the compensator into the slide and into the barrel. Yes, the barrel is 4.25 inches, but you don't have 4.25 inches of threaded barrel. Because the compensator is built into the barrel, similar to some of the other 1911 double stack 1911s are out there, that is something that actually bothers me because I feel like it's taking the easy route and it limits the size of the expansion chamber to some degree, and it also limits what you can do inside the expansion chamber. You cannot, without considerable effort, and they did use a bull barrel, so they were able to approach this, and I do appreciate that, but you can't create a larger flat or angled floor on the expansion chamber as easily when you machine it into a barrel because you're limited by the circumference of the barrel. And since barrels are round, they tend to stay round when you start machining them unless you get into the specifics. They did flatten to the best of their ability because the bull barrel does flare a little bit, the circumference increases there at the end. They were able to flare that out a little bit, but the expansion chamber floor sits just below the lip of the crown. So we're not getting as much potential compensation as we could if we went with a detachable or an additional comp design like you see with like a Firehawk or something like that. So getting into it, my question of course was going to be, does the compensator provide the value over a traditional 4.5 2-inch gun, or stepping up to like a 5? As far as features go, I'm using the Agency Arms AOS system. They license it from Agency Arms, which is one of the best modular optic plate systems out there. The caveat, of course, is they're building the plates, they're not having Agency build them. They're also providing their own screws, which is something that's been identified online. The screws that come with their AOS plate, the one that they are building through licensing, isn't very good. The tolerances were not great. I put it on the gun, I installed it, I installed their plate, I installed their screws, and within the first 50 rounds, that plate was loose. The screws are not long enough, they don't have enough thread engagement. So I immediately took that plate off and threw it directly into the trash. I happen to have a Springfield AOS license plate, same plate system, licensed from Agency Arms, different screws, different plate, different tolerances. I threw that on the gun, got it tightened down, spec'd, optic remounted, zeroed, and I got to work. Now the caveat to the plate system, I have a relationship with Agency Arms. I've been in their pro staff since 2015, I'm not leaving. So it's kind of a conflict of me to do reviews on their products because of that relationship. So I'm not going to be drop testing this gun throughout the review. You guys, those of you guys that know about my relationship with Agency Arms, you're familiar with this. Some things I have to kind of set aside because that's just fair. But the rest of the 2,000 round review is going to be just like it would be. The advantage to the AOS system that I found over the 2,000 round reviews is it didn't lose zero, so that's pretty awesome. I have pretty nice magwell on this. It's a section magwell, so I can get in there and pinch the magazine if I have to get out of there. As far as magazine compatibility goes, I use 17 and 20 rounders, or 22s. Primarily the higher capacity mags. 17s, I didn't use them unless I was shooting from concealment. That flush mag is going to be in the gun for carry concealed. This isn't a gun that I mean, you can carry any gun concealed if you're enthusiastic about it enough. But it's not something I would generally carry concealed, although I will shoot from concealment during the review process just to see if there's any kind of weird hiccups or anything like that. I use Checkmate mags, STI Gen 1 and above. Also use the Prodigy mags. A word on the Prodigy mags, the extended magazines did not like the magwell on this gun. So they sometimes had to be stripped from the gun. They would not drop free. Every other magazine I used, Atlas, STI, Alchemy, Checkmate, Prodigy 17 rounders, all dropped free. So magazine compatibility, no issues there. As far as ammunition goes, I used 115, 124, 124 plus P. We'll talk about that as we get into it. Getting back to the control features, like I said, Series 70 gun, I've got ambi safety. I've got a traditional right-handed slide release, slide lock, slide release. Another cool thing that they do provide with this, and something I didn't mess with a whole lot, is I have changeable trigger shoes that are actually really easy to change, so I can increase the I guess, length of the trigger pull as far as placement of the finger. I can set it up to where my finger has to sit a little further forward, a little further back. That's kind of cool for them to provide that, because not all hands are created equal. Someone with smaller hands or smaller hands or larger hands might like their trigger shoe to be a different length. I guess it'd be the length from the rear of the trigger well. I guess would be the best way to put it. So having that option is pretty cool. As far as trigger break goes, on my meter, an average of 10, I was breaking just over 4 pounds, 4.8 ounces. So a little bit of a heavier trigger on the trigger side, which is unfortunate because it's a Series 70 gun, so you would expect the trigger potentially to be a little bit lighter. That wasn't necessarily the case. I have a polymer frame, and on some of their guns that I've shot in the past, the polymer grip module has felt a little weak. It had some flex to it. Not much, but there was noticeable flex. On this gun, that doesn't exist. It feels really firm, and no matter how hard I squeeze or convulsively squeeze this gun, I can't create a pinch or a fraction point without literally unseating the grip and purposely trying to do it. So I really appreciated that. The safeties are forced to overcome like they should be, but I don't have to place a lot of undue weight on it. As a right-handed person, this is not something you'd usually notice, but as a left-handed person, generally the left-handed safety is a little bit of an afterthought, and it isn't necessarily machined to the same quality. Now, all the parts inside the Mac are machined. There's no printed parts that I'm aware of, at least any of the literature and parts I looked at when I took it apart. I didn't see anything that kind of stood out. But usually that safety on the right side of the gun has a binding issue, or it's harder to sweep off. Not the case with the DS9 Comp. Now, like I said, primarily I use this gun from duty holster. I use a Safariland 2011 holster. No compatibility, no fit issues there. It performed just fine. I also shot at concealment using an A&R design holster for a Staccato 2011. This gun fit right in it. Everything worked great there. As far as performance, that first 500 rounds, the first thing you're going to notice is the spring weight. To the best of my knowledge, everything that I've found, my own testing and what I've looked at online prior to filming this, it's a 16-pound recoil spring with a 23-pound mainspring. And then the relationship between those two, 16 pounds is a little bit too heavy for this gun. And there may be a reasoning for that. One of the interesting things that you see with factory-provided comps is some manufacturers will go on the lighter side with their recoil spring, and some manufacturers will go on the heavier side with their recoil spring. Generally, the heavier springs, you kind of have to have a good grip for the gun to function correctly. With the lighter springs, you can have a weaker or a more compromised grip, like a newer shooter who hasn't really figured out their pressure yet, and the gun's going to cycle. The disadvantage to the lighter spring when you have a more practiced, more confident grip is you get a lot of slide stutter on reloads. Not a huge deal. So if you look at an XC spring weight versus a Mac 9DS Comp spring weight, you're definitely going to see a difference there. Obviously different size guns too, although this is available in the 5-inch as well. spring's too heavy, and you'll notice that, especially when I'm shooting 115, the ejection pattern is very anemic. I'm getting a lot of shell case contact on my optic because the gun just isn't spitting them out like it should be because of that increased drag created by that heavier spring. Not a big deal, didn't cause any malfunctions. Throughout the 2,000 rounds shooting this thing, I only had one failure to extract, and I had one failure to feed on a dirty magazine. So I can't attribute that necessarily to the gun, but the anemic behavior, especially shooting 115. If you're not going to shoot 115, this isn't going to be an issue, because on 124 it did perform a lot better, and 124 plus P performed fantastic. Overall behavior of the gun seemed optimized for 124. Shooting 124, I could get a lot of speed out of it. Even with that heavier trigger, I was able to manage some pretty quick splits. I don't have the fastest trigger finger out there. Generally on a 2011 or a single action only style gun, I'm going to average splits between 1.7 and 1.9 when I'm going mechanically fast. And I was able to achieve that with this gun, although a little bit harder of a press. Obviously a lighter trigger will give you a little bit more ability to shoot the gun a little bit quicker. If splits isn't something you focus a lot on, and maybe not something you're going to worry about, but compensators really provide their worth when you're shooting faster or shooting more efficiently. If I'm at 3, 5, 7 yards, I should be able to use every single sight picture I see. So that means I'm going to pull that trigger every time that sight picture is there. And at those distances, that usually means I'm going to be shooting mechanically fast or really close to it. That's where compensators really provide their worth, because they allow you to get your sight picture back a little bit faster because the muzzle rise is a little less pronounced. The compensator on this gun does compensate. It doesn't compensate as well as I think it could if they'd gone, like I said earlier in the video, with a detached style compensator, so they'd really be able to feel out that expansion chamber. That being said, of the guns I've fired with this style of compensator, machined into a bull barrel versus a detachable or an additional add-on compensator that is kind of separate from the barrel but married, you guys know what I'm talking about. Of the guns I fired in this particular style, I think that one of the big ones that stands out is the Prodigy right off the top of my head, but there's other ones out there. This compensator performs fine, but it's one of those things where it's like it could be better. Looking at the gun as it comes from the factory, provided this compensator does provide compensation, so it's not a cosmetic addition to the gun. Because I've got 4.25-inch 2011s that I can compare it to. Even though I don't do comparison reviews, we're talking just on the merits of the gun, but I tell you guys specifically during the review process, comparing my own personal comparison of experience between shooting two different styles of guns, both the 4.25 and this gun, which is 4.25 asterisk compensated. Compensator does work. So like I said, it's not a cosmetic feature. It allows a 4.25-inch gun to be just marginally faster. And the way that you kind of spec that out for your own personal self is you check your splits in comparison to your accuracy. I can shoot either gun just as fast, but with the compensator, I'm able to provide consistently tighter groups with the same splits, which means the compensator is giving me that sight picture a little bit sooner, marginally measurable. Now, once I get further away and I start shooting at increased distances, compensators help me get a sight picture back faster, which still allows me to shoot quicker splits, even if the splits themselves are slower. So from 25 yards, I'm not going to shoot those 0.17, 0.19s. But I can sneak in some 0.3s, some 0.4s, whereas with a traditional 4.25-inch gun, I may be shooting 0.45, 0.55, or slower, because the gun takes longer to settle and give me that usable sight picture back. And that's why compensators are fantastic when they work, and on this gun, compensator does work. Overall, it was an enjoyable experience to put 2,000 rounds through this thing. I think if we go back 5 years, or 10 years for sure, and say, hey, out of the box, 2011 that's going to run, people would be scratching their heads. If we said, out of the box, 2011, or double stack 1911, that's going to run for under $1,500, people would be like, are you insane? And it's not really the case anymore. If I was going to compare this head-to-head with some higher-end 2011s, there would be some differences. Some of them would be preference, some of them would be objective. But on its own merits, this is a fantastic gun. Also, it didn't cost me a lot of money. The funny thing about it is I reached out to Mac to see if they'd be willing to send me one, and there was kind of a break in communication, so I went ahead and just bought it. So this wasn't a provided gun. This particular gun that I reviewed was one that I purchased and put through the review process, 2,000 rounds, and it was an enjoyable experience. It's something I'm definitely going to hold on to. I'm not going to get rid of this, and you'll probably see a 5 or a 10,000 round update in the future. Now, final word on this, of course, is accuracy. Is it inherently accurate? I'll tell you right now that you're not getting $3,000 2011 accuracy out of this gun. But I will show you 5-round group fired at 25 yards, which is a 0 confirmation distance. This is a 124 grain gold dot, 25 yards back supported. I can't be upset with that. I really can't. Of course, that's bag supported. Now shooting B8s, can I still shoot in the 80s and the 90s or sneak in 100? Yeah, you can. The gun is inherently accurate. Would another 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000 or 4,000 provide a tighter group? It absolutely would, because there are objective values to those increased costs within reason, depending on what we're talking about. So if I wanted to step up to a higher end 2011, I will see some marginal increases in performance. I will also see some subjective increases in performance based on personal preference and internal biases. Out of the box, fantastic gun, with the caveat being that you kind of have to replace that plate system. Now, I'm sure Mac is addressing it. I've already heard that they're changing the screws that are provided with the gun. That's fantastic. They should be Torx, not Allen heads. Allen heads that small will round off really easily. I think that was a terrible choice on their part. Their plates, if they just QC them a little bit better, the spec's going to be a little bit better, because the looser the plate fits, the more risk we have with whatever screws are provided mounting the plate to the frame slide. Because the looser the fit, the more the plate can move during recoil against those screws, and we don't want that. So we want a nice tight fit and then some really good screws with enough thread length to provide consistent deep engagement, as deep as possible engagement in the slide of the gun. Using the Prodigy plate from Springfield, I had that. So no loss of 0 over those 2,000 rounds. Now, there is a little bit of play. That's one of the things you notice when you get into why is this gun more expensive than that gun. So the slide to frame fit does have a little bit of play in it, but it's not something that bothered me, and it's not something that caused a significant loss of accuracy or functionality of the gun. So final word on the Mac 9 DS Comp 4.25 inch is it's a fantastic gun. They could make it a little bit better by, again, final time I'll mention this, divorcing the idea of machining the comp into the barrel and actually creating a standalone compensator that is then added to the gun. Other than that, it's a good gun, and I am not upset that I bought it, not upset that I shot it for 2,000 rounds, and I'm going to keep using it. Till next time, Aaron Cowan, Sage Dynamics, train accordingly.